Cool. So we're actually live streaming.
There we go.
Cool. This is our first live stream, which is kind of exciting. Um, well, welcome everybody, I guess. Zachary Styles, we're going to be speaking to him today. He is a part of the paper plane design team. Has been for I think just over a year now. I think Zach.
Yep.
Has a long career in printmaking, illustration, lecturing, in the fashion industry as well. So that's very exciting, and I've always loved like looking through your work and stuff that you do for Ripcool, etc. So it's great just to kind of chat to you and get a little bit more information and a little bit more background on where you come from and you know why you do the stuff that you do the way that you do them. So this is part of a bit of a series called Remarkable Interactions that we're going to be doing on a like monthly basis or a weekly basis, but we're going to be chatting to creatives and just finding out about what makes them tick and you know what they find interesting and inspiring. So Zach, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I'm super excited.
Oh, a pleasure. This is fun.
Oh,
It's a nice excuse to actually put some work up because it always just dies in the hard drive somewhere. So it was a nice little kick in the pants to go, okay, what did I do exactly? Oh, yeah. Okay, cool.
yeah, it's always cool to look back on stuff, right? Some of it is, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? And then there's some of
Yeah.
it's like, oh my word, yeah, this was cool. You remember those little aha moments that you had while creating them. So that's great. It's always good to kind of reflect a bit. So I think
Yeah.
just to kick it off, I think Zach, just give us some background. Where does that type guy come from? That's your Instagram and kind of social
Yeah.
handle overall mostly. So where does it come from?
Um, oh, it's kind of a funny story because I was never really I never really considered myself like a good artist, and artist is kind of like such a massive word. I knew I was going to be in the arts in some fashion at some point because the sciences weren't for me. I find it fascinating, but I'm not good at them. Maths as well. I like back in high school. I'm like I could do it, but it wasn't something I was like, yes, I'm so excited to do this. Art and technical drawing was always stuff I was really quite keen on. And I knew okay, I was going to go into art, but I didn't really know how, why, or where kind of thing. I was going to just let it happen, let whatever happens happen, and ended up one story led to another, and I ended up in Durban studying graphic design with Skulk actually. That was quite fun. We had an absolute blast, and about I think it was toward the end of first year or possibly second year. I think during the course of second year, so this was 2017. I got into kind of drawing as a way of expressing, and I found that like because I went through a fairly emotional period, and I didn't want to just tweet my thoughts because everyone did that, and like that's just boring. So I was like, well, what if I just drew them? You know, what if I like the things I wanted to say, which were words. I was like, okay, well, let me just draw them out, and that's what got me into lettering. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. This is quite fun. And I kind of just I did a challenge where I did like one post a day for I don't even know how long it lasted. I think I went quite a while with it, but that built up quite a muscle. And then I ended up having people kind of message me and be like, "Hey, this thing that you did, can you do that for me?" And I'm like, I never thought about it. I hadn't really considered it that much at that point. I was kind of like, well, I mean, I could, I guess.
Yeah.
And now, and that's when I start trying to figure out like, okay, well, how do I price this? How does this work? You know, all the business practices that you kind of learn on the fly. I'm like going, okay, I guess I could charge you this, and they accept it really quickly, and you go, okay, I could probably have charged more,
Yeah.
or they give some pushback, and you go, okay, well, maybe I'm not there yet, you know. So I learned a lot of that then, but Type Guy came about when. I was doing lots of type-based stuff during the course of that year and the following year, but mainly during that year. And whenever I'd make something, Skulk, you might be able to correct me on this. I might be making this memory up, but I think when people would refer to me, they'd be like, "Oh, Zach's just that Zach does that type stuff. He's that type guy kind of thing," and that kind of like just stuck a bit. And I went through a couple different names when I was making my business at that point, and it was quite bad. I went through a couple. I had Styles Type Design, which I thought was really cool until we abbreviated it, and we saw it was STD. So we're like, all right, well that's not gonna work. I even ran with it for a while without realizing. We were like, oh, let me do a logo. Oh wait, it's not gonna work.
Oh my goodness.
And I think it was around Christmas time or November, Christmas, somewhere around there, 2017. We were like going, okay, I knew that I was gonna do that type. What was it that
I just want
point?
to
I
say
think it
your
was.
SEO would be so strong if you did go with STD. But
Yeah, yeah, probably. Not sure I'd get the clients I'm going for,
no,
but
missing the target a little bit. But
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, there might be something there. I'll do a marketing campaign. Um, and I think there was some point I remember we at home we had a massive family gathering, and we what my mom had decided to do was we didn't want to do tablecloths. We were gonna just do. We had a bunch of like tables, and we did brown paper coverings on the tables, and then there were just crayons everywhere. I seem to remember it was a Christmassy kind of thing, but not too sure. Um, and everyone was drawing and whatever, and it was Christmas, and it was some kind of festive thing, and there was lots of wine involved, lots of gin involved, and eventually when the food left, everyone brought the crayons, and we just drawing on the table and everything, and then we got talking more and more about the type guy. Oh, Zach, what are you doing this thing? And I'm like, oh, well, maybe we can do this, maybe we can do that. And like a few hours later, we had it. We knew we were going to go with that type guy, and it was going to be this. It was not going to be STD. And that's kind of where the brand type that type guy came from. Was I was always kind of referred to as that type guy, so it just made sense.
nice.
Um, and it felt more natural.
Yeah,
Um, and then just a couple drinks into a festive evening, it was solidified.
nice. That's
Yeah,
awesome. That's a great kind of organic way of it happening, right?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
fantastic. So, I mean, you speak a little bit about using type and sketching and typography and drawing and stuff as a almost a journaling, if like journaling kind of practice. Do you still do that a lot?
Not as much anymore. I find that interesting kind of uh, transition that happens when you do something for fun. You do a lot more of it until you do it for work, and suddenly it starts to become like, oh, do I need to? Do I have to? Okay, yes, I've got to pay the bills, or I've got to do this, I've
Yeah.
got to do that. I still do it, and I love it when I do it, but there aren't as many occasions where I'm doing it for the fun of it anymore, or
Gotcha.
doing it, or rather doing it for the sake of doing it. I'm kind of doing it as part of a larger process.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that kind of sketching, I mean, you've got a very specific style that I mean, looking at that on the screen, I mean, that's very, very specific. You've got a very kind of strong aesthetic. Is that kind of what led you into going to work for Rip Curl? Is that something that attracted them from your style? Is that something that kind of stood out from your portfolio? And I mean, I've looked at your stuff on Instagram and social media, and I mean it's a very strong aesthetic that you've kind of delivered while working there as well. Is that kind of what you mostly worked on while you were there as well?
Yeah, so so one of the things that I always wanted to be a part of what I did was no matter what kind of deliverable I gave, whether it was like a literal lettering piece, or if it was just some kind of illustrator thing, like a skull or like a bottle or something. Whatever the deliverable was, I knew that I wanted it to be hand drawn. That was something that I loved probably the more than anything else, was the fact that this isn't something you can just copy paste from the internet or go wherever, and it's a vector pack or something. Like even if I could type it out, I don't, or I try my best not to, because I like the fact that it's going to be imperfect and it's going to look kind of hand drawn. Even if it's drawn on an iPad, it's still drawn by hand. So it's that's an aesthetic, or kind of like a golden thread that I've tried to pull through with my work. And with Rip Curl, I didn't necessarily join them to do as much of what I ended up doing. It was kind of it was right place, right time, knowing the right people, and I was like, cool. Well, this sounds pretty fun. I knew I didn't necessarily want to be in a marketing house. I knew I wanted to kind of be in one company and learn their language and their
Yeah.
process and kind of work through it that way. And I got to do that with Rip Curl. And then because of the work I was doing with all my drawing, that I just did more of that by hand, and then that just became quite an aesthetic. I mean, to the point where sometimes I was told, okay, Zach, you have to try and draw something else because it kind of all looks the same now. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Commercially, it does need to be a little different. Otherwise, I'm my only customer. So that was an interesting kind of professional challenge to overcome. But whenever I could, I'd try and bring in that kind of, I guess, that kind of visual style that you see. I still don't know what to call it or how to describe it. It's just kind of how when my hand goes and draws stuff, it's just kind of what it does, and
Yeah.
I let it kind of go where it wants to go. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily something they specifically looked for. It was just happened to be there, and then we made the most of it.
Nice. And it kind of almost comes natural, right? So it's just the way it flows. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's very
yeah.
interesting. So if you had to look back now, maybe someone starting out in the industry, being back in first year in varsity, is there anything that, looking at your career, and I mean, you've gone now from very hand-drawn stuff. I mean, at Pepper Plane, you do UX design. It's very interface-based stuff. But what I do, what I do think still exists is that kind of humanness. I mean, you've spoken about it being hand-drawn, handwritten, that kind of aesthetic, but I think there's still at a different level. There's that very much like human interaction and kind of personal, interactions that happen. So looking at that, and you've almost gone from one end to the other end to a certain extent. If you would show anybody your work that you started out doing with that type guy, Rip Curl, what you're doing now, in terms of deciding on a career path or deciding what to do you have any advice for someone starting out now? Because I know one of the big questions is like people start out wanting to do one thing, and I always tell them, just go with the flow a little bit because you don't know where it'll take you. It's so vast. So, are there any learnings from your path so far that you'd want to share with anybody starting out now in first year?
Yeah, I think probably one of the things that's helped me the most is not necessarily knowing what I want to do or what I'm good at, but knowing what I don't want to do and what I'm not good at. Because
Fair.
like by a rule of elimination, I know what's going to be a waste of time for me to focus on, whether it's something that I know I'm just inherently not great at, or I'm like, you know what, I just don't have a passion for this thing. So if I try to do it, I'm just going to burn myself out because I'm going to work too hard for it, with little results. So I think when I started my graphic design career, I knew what I didn't want to do, and then
Yeah.
the rest was kind of open for me to figure out and explore. I was like, well, I could do this, maybe. I mean, this might be fun, but I don't know. Let me dive into it and see what happens. I just knew I didn't want to do this, so don't even bother going there.
So,
I'm
so
not
what are
gonna
some
waste
of
my
those
time.
things that you didn't want to do? I'm
Um,
curious now.
like I remember when we did our what's it, our internships, or our job shadowing, and um I went to a marketing house. I'm not sure what the correct term for it is, but basically, like each day I'd be working on a very different thing, with very different brand language, very different kind of expectations. And I was working a little bit in animation, a little bit of that. And I'm like, I had so much. I was like, I don't necessarily think I'm good at this. And with how I like to work, I like to time block and focus in context for dedicated periods of time. So to go from off the top of my head, like going doing a social media post for Rama and then going straight into trying to animate something for Colgate. I'm like, I just couldn't wrap my head around. Okay, there's very different styles happening
Yeah.
here, and guidelines and expectations, and I just felt like I'd rather learn one company's thing and get that right first and then go from there. So I knew just doing the full stack approach just wasn't necessary for me at that point. So that's what when the Rip Curl thing came up, I'm like, oh, one company, I'll just be their graphic designer. I have no idea what exactly I'm going to be doing, what my proficiency is in that. I mean, you learn a lot on the fly when you're a junior designer.
Yeah.
So I was, but I knew that there was some kind of opportunity there. And I knew that there wouldn't be in other places.
That's awesome. And I think yeah, so deciding on what you don't want to do, that's kind of that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so let's maybe dive into some of the projects. One question I would have is there a particularly challenging project that you've worked on, and how you approached it to find a creative solution? Maybe you can talk us a little bit through your process. When you get a brief or you get a problem to solve, maybe you could just walk us through a little bit of that, or maybe if there's an example, you can point at any of these on the screen, even, and you know,
Yeah.
is there anything there that you can share?
I'm wondering. I know that I often get anxious about new projects because I don't know where they're going to go and I don't know I don't know what am I going to do for them and how am I even going to be good enough to deliver what they expect? What's their vision? Things like that. So just as like a blanket thing, what I often try to do, and I was doing some writing about it the other day, just for myself, was like the creative process is a literal process that you just need to follow. There's so many times where I've gone like during the course of the day going, oh, I've got to work on this illustration this evening and I don't know what I'm going to do. Oh, I'm just so stressed about it. And I just get into my head so much. And then when I actually sit down and, okay, let me look at some inspiration. Like, oh, wait, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Immediately things start firing off and I'm like, okay, could do that, could do this. I like what they did there, not what they did there. And that kind of piece things together, start sketching. And I think there was one instance where it's for a recent project. It's not on here, but I was doing some t-shirt illustrations and I initially felt like that going, I have no idea what this is going to look like. And I think when I actually got down to it, I think an hour or two later, I was looking at going, this is probably one of the coolest things I've ever made. And it was just such a weird, very biased perspective, but it was I was looking at this going, an hour ago I thought that this was going to be terrible, but that was because I just didn't know, and like I needed to just envelop myself in the process and let the process just happen. And you
Yeah,
often find that once you just kind of surrender to it, it's it'll turn out a lot better than you expect. I'm also just a naturally kind of anxious person, so if I go down a particular rabbit hole, I'll go down that rabbit hole.
yeah,
So it's a nice exercise. I love the fact that there is a creative process because I can just surrender to it and see what happens. And like 9 times out of 10, I end up coming up with something pretty good or something that leads to something that'll be really great. The few cases where it doesn't happen, that's just because there's a misalignment somewhere
yeah.
for whatever reason. So I think just as a blanket thing, I'll say just trust the kind of creative process. Even if and I'll do that. I have to force myself to do that, but when I do, it works out pretty well.
So is that a process that you had to kind of uh learn, or is it a process that that changes constantly? Uh, is it like a fixed steps that you go through, or is it just kind of just start and see where it leads? Can you expand a little bit on what you would describe your creative process as, even if it's not the same every time?
Sure, yeah. So it follows a pretty standard a pretty set kind of roadmap, I guess. Is I'll I'll very similar to what we do with UX, which I think is what makes it more easily adaptable than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Is there's a stage of discovery where you ask a lot of questions, and you don't need to come up with the answers yet. You just need to know what questions you need to ask. And it took me a while to figure out what are those questions to ask. I'm like, I have to ask myself, what do I need to know? Okay, those
Yeah.
are the literal questions I need to have. And then what might be useful? Okay, those are also questions. And there's also all the pricing questions and things like that, as well. But from the creative side, there's a discovery phase where you ask a whole lot of questions. Communication is key, and then after that, it's just about exploration. So throw a whole lot of things down, whether that's in sketching or if it's in wireframing or if it's in mood boarding. Just kind of gather ideas and things. What I like to do is I'll go from discovery straight into mood boarding and kind of putting together visual styles, going, okay, we're not going to go in this direction and we're keen to go in this direction. What are some of your ideas? And even then it's still quite discovery, but we're kind of honing down what'll be good, what'll be
Yeah.
useful, which in essence is just eliminating what I shouldn't be focusing on. And
Yeah.
sometimes what I like to do is I'll do a literal do's and don'ts kind of situation where I say we're keen to go in this direction. I don't want to go in this direction. And then client will
Gotcha.
kind of confirm that or not. And then I know, okay, don't even waste time looking at that. So when I come across something like that in my research or in my exploration later on, I know don't worry about it. But if I hadn't asked that already, I might just waste time going in that direction.
Yeah.
So I like to narrow that down. And from there, I'll go into sketching, specifically with illustration and lettering projects where just lots of sketching and going, okay, try this, try that. Often you've got great ideas in your head, but when you draw them out, there's gaps that your brain filled for you. And you go, oh, this is actually quite crap.
Yes.
Let's go with the next one. What's going to come next? What's going to come next? That whole exercise of like, Skulk, you remember we did like 50 logos in an hour or something in one of our projects. Like, the first 30 are going to be terrible, but you just have to get through them. And you might find that one of the first 10 combined with one of the 45th one is going to make something great, but you had to get through them first. So
Yeah.
I apply the same kind of thinking with any of my sketching. Sometimes I get lucky, but it's luck to get it on the first try. Um, but it's just that process of kind of getting through those sketches, and from there I'll go and we'll do reviews. And before I get into the details, because I can very easily get lost in the details, especially when it comes to drawing. Can just curve this a little bit more, and do this a little bit here, and can add some details there. But you could find that we're not even going to go with this concept, so that all that time got wasted. So stick to those kind of sketches, and then from there go into vector work, for example, with illustrations, and then you get into the details, and then from there it's refinement. So I like to kind of start quite heavy, and you essentially narrowing it down. It's the same creative process for lots of industries in the, I guess, in the creative space. um, it's essentially discovery, trying a few things, knowing what not to do, and then narrowing it down, mocking some stuff up so that we know we're heading in the right direction, and then just kind of chipping away and sculpting this thing.
So, and I mean, that makes complete sense. I think some of the projects where we got, me personally and in Paperplane, where we got down to a certain point and we're like, this is just not working. And we go look back at the process and we're like, oh, but it won't work because we skipped the step in the process, right? We didn't do enough research, we didn't ask enough questions, and then we kind of, okay, reset, go back, let's do this, let's do it right. And then you get to a much better product. But like, especially with this type of work that I'm looking at here on your screen, I mean, there's a lot of time and effort and blood and sweat and tears that go into something like an illustration. And I mean, that's for any project, really. But I think illustration has almost got this kind of artifact, um, uh, feeling to it. Is it, when do you know that when do you kind of throw it away and start over? And how, like, have you done that a lot where you got to the end and it's like, you can't be precious about it? Like, maybe, do you have any kind of experience share about having put like that sunken cost kind of idea where you've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into something, and it's like you don't want to throw it away, but you have to, you got to throw it away, and you got to go back and
Yeah.
you got to start again. So I mean, have you had any of those projects?
Yeah, so there's an illustration at the bottom left corner here. The Up Spirits. It's got like a whiskey bottle behind it. That bottle
Yeah,
went through a number of revisions because I started with it looking like a rum bottle, and then the type was different. And because it's an integrated piece where it's got the bottle kind of has to work with the text. Any one thing you change changes everything else. So I
yeah,
think we went through three different revision stages for that project where there were a whole bunch of them. There was Up Spirits, the quality is our course in the middle far left, but like and that was one of the earlier ones that didn't even make it. But I just liked the style of it. But like there were a number of like little things that I'll spend a lot of time and detail on that for whatever reason, sometimes it just doesn't work with the brand, or there's something off here, or we need to change the bottle layout or something. There's a lot of that sunken cost, especially because I do pretty much all of my stuff by hand.
yeah,
There's a lot of time that gets spent drawing this out, making sure the perspective works, getting those details in, and then it either doesn't work because they don't want to run it anymore, or it doesn't, this one doesn't work with the other four, so got to redo it. That was one instance of that. And I know I was working on the same t-shirt thing I was talking about earlier, was that we did three t-shirts, and one of them I had two great options, or I thought they were two great options. They were just in two very different directions, but I wanted to make sure that they both looked as good as they could be. And because sometimes as an artist, as a designer, we have this vision of what it could be, but client might not necessarily see that vision. So you have to try and illustrate that vision as much as possible while taking into account any the fact that one of them's going to get cut. One
yeah,
of them's going to get cut. The likelihood of them going, this is so great, you know what, we're going to keep both of them, is very slim. Budgets are what they are, and all of that. So I know that one of them was going to get cut, but I needed to make sure that they were both as good as they could be, so that they both had the same kind of potential to be the one.
yeah, for
So
sure.
that was an instance where that happened as well. And I spent a lot of time going, like, this could be better. We can work on this, but I do literally have to stop myself sometimes, and go, this is good enough. And it could be better, but it could always be better. I can always tweak this or scratch that, or add a bit more texture, or smoothen this a bit more, change the font or whatever. I can always do a little bit more, but at some point I have to kind of let go and say this is good enough, and then let the stakeholder, it's their decision at the end of the day anyway, go, actually them, wait for them to tell me that this is what they actually
Yeah,
want or not. I've had to do that a few times where I'm like, you know what, and it's worked on both sides, or on both kind of sides of the spectrum, where I look at something and I'm like, this is really great, I love this, and I send it to them and they pick the terrible one, and I'm like, what, why did you do that? This is not the one you should have gone with. But it's
yeah,
not my product, it's not my brand, not my vision.
yeah,
I'm just one, I'm like one step in their larger process, so I have to kind of surrender that to them,
yeah,
which I'm happy for. That's part of the process, and I end up learning as a part of that as well. Like, oh, you thought that was better. That's interesting. I wonder why. And then I kind of go into that, and I might figure it out or not. But then
yeah,
there's also other sides where I'm like, you know what, I don't necessarily like this, and it could be better, and I don't know, but let me share it and see what they think. And they come back saying, this is amazing, this is great. And I'm like, really? Okay, if you say so. And that's just because we sometimes we see things they don't, and they see things that we don't, and we kind of have it. It's a team effort. It kind of
yeah,
it's a joining of minds. No thing is done in isolation. I don't think no great and worthwhile thing, I think, is done in isolation. So sometimes you just have to surrender
yeah,
and go, you know what, it's not actually up to me all the time. Sometimes it is, but not all the time. And again, just trust that process. If they like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. You've always got another project to work on. And
yeah.
sometimes I go, oh, that could have been better. I'll just do better on the next project. Don't try and perfect that now. Just take what you learn and put that into the next one.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think a rule for me is always, once you think you've got it, once you think it's perfect, do another 10. And then if that one is still the best, then you know.
Yeah.
You can always overshoot and then come back and if that one is still the right one, then you know you're good there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's a good kind of segue into collaboration that you just mentioned. It's with the client, with the users, with the people that's going to use the brand, it's going to see the stuff, it's going to wear the t-shirt. Um, do you enjoy collaboration? I mean, you don't have to, right? I think everybody's like, oh, it all needs to be so collaborative, and everybody needs to work together, and it's, it's like, and I think some people just don't like it, and it's fine. And the work that they do, it's just it's part of it's a process thing, right? Some people need a lot of collaboration in their process. Other people want to not collaborate necessarily, and then bring it to the table after they've gone through a certain process. So where does collaboration kind of fit into your scene and your process and your kind of thinking when it comes to design?
It comes in as early as possible because I know that while I'm not a hugely social person. I'm introverted by nature, so I'm quite happy to do things on my own and figure things out. But I know that at the end of the day, whatever I'm creating is not just for me; it's for other people. So I have to go, okay, as much as I could do this on my own, I know it'll be better if I did it with other people. And that's part of that process. Like you kind of have to surrender to that. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but that's all a learning experience. I know I've had instances with clients where I'm not looking forward to feedback sessions because I'm like, I know I'm going to have to be working more on this, or I know we're not really aligning on something. But let's just do it. That whole thing about the professional does it because they have to, not because they want to, that's just part of the process. And I know that every time I've done that, as hard as it is to kind of enter that experience,
Mm.
we have a much better product at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Whether it's because we had loads of feedback and a lot of the first revisions were cuck and
Yeah.
we finally got it right at the end, or we kind of were, we were trying to figure it out and we'd had lots of iterations, whatever the specific process was, we always came to a better thing at the end because we worked on it together.
For sure.
And so knowing that from experience, I think that's also one of the things that it's hard to teach that. You kind of have to learn that through the experience of it and go, okay, I know I didn't enjoy that initially, but the process was important for the outcome. And so I now have to kind of remind myself that sometimes. And then I've also had clients where they literally say, no, I mean, you can do what you want. We trust you. And I also, when that happens, I'm like, oh, what? Are you sure? Like, no, I have too much power. I
Yeah.
could do this on my own. I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
It's that what's it that analogy of the playground with the kids. Like I always remember this for some reason is when there's a playground and there's no fence, and
Yeah.
you tell the kids to go and play on whatever they want, they can do what they want. They'll kind of stick to one area and kind of, they'll do a few things, but they'll stick to a small area. As soon as you put boundaries around the thing, they'll push it all the way to the boundary because they
Yeah.
know where their boundaries are,
True.
and they know they can push that out. So I like to be collaborative to a degree because it means that you're defining the limitations, not me, because it's too easy for me, or it's actually too difficult for me to define limitations because it could be anything. I could draw
Yeah.
anything, type anything, it's like, there's too much I could possibly do. So collaboration helps to like kind of confine what's possible, what's doable, what's realistic. That could be from a timeline, from an effort, from a budget perspective, but collaboration helps to kind of make sure that we are doing what we should do within what we can do. So it's kind of weird because collaboration can be good and bad, but over a longer period of time, like on average, it always works out better, in a sense.
Yeah, I think it's also well, what you mentioned, the other perspective, right? Nobody on earth sees anything the same as anybody else, right? So even if it's the same target market or the same, you know, corporates or CEOs or whatever, that they come from the same kind of mindset, they'll still bring something from their background that'll make them see something slightly different, which is on the one hand what keeps design interesting, because nobody will ever see your work the same. not one person will see your work and think of it the same as the guy next to him, even if they're part of the same demographic, age, all that stuff on paper. It'll all be consumed and processed differently. So I think the collaboration, that's quite a good angle
Yeah.
to cover as much of that as possible, and to make sure that you cover enough of the
Yeah.
cases.
It means that you're allowing space for the human experience. That
Yeah,
sometimes people are going to see something different to you, and they also might have a different perspective of awareness about the thing than you do. Like I'm just looking at this t-shirt design. I'm not thinking about um like how's it going to get retailed, how's it going to get marketed, is it for the right market, is it going in the right store for the right people. I could be like, oh, this is a really cool illustration, yeah, it's really cool, but the people who are going to buy it in that store in that location don't care about that thing, they care about this thing. But I wouldn't know that unless they had that perspective. So while I could do stuff on my own, and this is also just my perspective, but I could do stuff on my own, but I know it will be better if I'm open to other people's perspectives, and I think that's where
absolutely.
collaboration can be useful. I think it's important to know when it is a hindrance. So that classic thing of, okay, um, uh, client is constantly changing things and going, okay, now we've now gone in a circle. We've gone back to version one here. So sometimes collaboration is a hindrance, but it's the awareness of that to be able to, and then stop that when you need to, and go, all right, well, we were here and etc., and we now need to go here because of this, and that's where important communication comes in. But I think it's an important process. You just need to know when it is and isn't useful, and be kind of always be open to it, in a sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and that's actually fine. I know why Diane is laughing, but I mean, but I also think it's almost like you've got to let it run its course, and you've got to almost have enough faith in your design that you allow it to go through the motions and then come back to what is the right solution in the end, right? You got to go like, okay, go off, get the collaboration, get the client to give feedback, whatever, bring it right on. Even you got to kind of almost have faith in that it's going to come back to what the right thing is. And we've seen it a lot. We've seen it happen constantly in projects as well. So
Mm.
yeah, it could be frustrating. Hopefully, the client in the end has enough faith also in you as a designer and as I don't want to say expert, but as the specialist in the of the group, that you would steer them right. And I think that sometimes it is a matter of building up that trust and stuff within that relationship, that then that builds up, and then you can get through that process much faster, or you can skip some steps and get there quicker.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk a little bit. Designers often have to balance the practical and the aesthetic aspect of their work, right? So, I mean, when it comes to a t-shirt print, when it comes to a wireframe, when it comes to an interface, an app, a website, can you share some of your thoughts on finding that balance and how it's influenced your design philosophy a little bit?
Sure. So that's always one of the first questions that I ask is, where's this going and what do you want to do with it? Because that can very easily knock out things that you might have had ideas for it. So like when it comes to t-shirts, you can't necessarily have this massive print. Like it might look cool when it's flat, but you have to take into account that when you're wearing it, it's going to curve around the body. That and you look at t-shirts online and kind of prints and kind of inspiration. Sometimes you see the flat versions, you're like, oh, that's a cool canvas, I can go all the way to the edge, and you can't really. From a practical perspective, that's going to be expensive as well. That was one of the best things that I learned during my tenure with Rip Curl, was how like the business side and the practical and process and production side of creating these things. It basically commercial or retail commercial design, not necessarily doing stuff for your portfolio, but knowing the medium that something's going to go into, and knowing what the limitations of that medium are, can help define what can and can't be done. So
Yeah.
when it comes to, I kind of always go back to t-shirts because I've had enough experience with that. But when you're going to put something on a sleeve, you can't have this massive, detailed, intricate thing because it's going to be quite difficult to see for the most part. Like you're only going to see it when you're looking something side on, or like it's going to be in an awkward place. It might be tucked under the arm. You've got to think about all those positions, and if it's going to go in the chest, is it going to go in the middle at the top? Is it going to go on the like the classic pocket placement position? Going to be too low? Is it going to be too far to the armhole? You got to understand the medium and the application in order to create something useful. And also, like, I've done packaging design quite a bit. I've done a lot more packaging design than I used to, which is really fun. I love physical, like, tangible products that you've designed. I had a few of them in my presentation, but it's like, that there's an edge to something, and you can go. It's that same thing with the boundary around the playground. It's like, I know this is what I can work with, and what can I do with this? And I
Yeah.
love knowing that, because I've had some instances where I'm like, okay, we want to do a sticker, or we want to do I'll go with a sticker, for example. And I designed this whole thing. I'm like, oh, this is cool. I love this. Go explore this direction, do this mood board and sketches. And then we find out later that it's a circle sticker, not a square sticker. And I'm like, I've kind of designed it with corners in mind. And I'm like, oh no, it's
Yeah.
not. And sometimes clients don't realize that it's not just a quick, chop off the corners. Like, this thing might have been, because of I do everything by hand, it's very custom. Those corners might have been a very important part of the design that I now
Yeah.
have to find a way to not include them. So I think it's important to know those mediums when you're looking at mobile designs as well. Like, you have to understand, this is how much space you have to work with. You don't
Yeah.
have a desktop screen. You can't, it's the world is your oyster when you're working on desktop. But I mean, the data shows a lot more people on mobile and tablet now than they ever were.
For
So
sure.
we have to take that into account and know that it's smaller. Okay, I can't do fonts at certain sizes. I can't. You have
Yeah.
to take into account resolutions, and a lot of stuff's going to be portrait. So it's all
Yeah.
about knowing that end goal, and that kind of that end medium, so that you make something that's catered to that as much as possible. Because if you don't know that, you can easily throw designs in the bin just because you didn't ask the right questions.
For sure. For sure. It's coming back to that boundaries again, right? So I would love to see more of your stuff that you've got here for us. Zach, you want to run us through some of your
Cool.
projects?
Yeah, so I've got four that I'm quite keen to show you guys from 2020, 2021, and now that I've been working on. So I'll start with Design Manifesto that I did as part of my honors studies. This was an interesting one because this was one of those projects that we didn't have to go as far as I went, but I did it because I wanted to, and I was like, let me use this as an excuse to kind of stretch my creative muscles, because when you're studying and working at the same time, finding space to be creative and express yourself is quite difficult. So I tried to do that as much during my studies as I could. So I did lots of cool work there, and this was one of those things where we had to create a manifesto for ourselves of however many things. Say, right, what are some things you'd want to say and share and that kind of thing. And I'd never done a manifesto up until this point. And it was pretty cool because I could go, well, what are my most important kind of tenets essentially when I'm designing stuff, and then and I had to write those out, and then I wanted to create kind of art to accompany that, so that I'd have like little thumbnails within the blog posts and stuff. And this was one of those things where I drew without caring what the outcome was going to be, because I was my own client and it didn't matter what it looked like, more than or as much as it was just about expression. So, for example, this little G as it moves into the R, I really don't like that, and I don't. I was like, it's so weird, and like, where does this? Where it comes up here? Where does it go? Like, this is now a separate thing. Like, if you really dig into it, there's a lot wrong with a lot of these things. Like this little own your own here, there's a little lip here that happens, and I'm like, that could be way better. But the when I did this, I told myself, don't worry about that. Just draw, and because there's so much art that I see around it, I'm like, that looks really great, and there's imperfections all over it, but I still
Yeah.
love the way it looks. So I tried to do that for myself. So this was one of those things where I was like, just just draw. I mean, some of these little spaces here and the N here is so thin, like the white space in between. I'm like, I could always make stuff better, but I had to stop myself from doing that. So this was a nice way. This was a nice thing that I did that kind of helped me practice that muscle of just leaving it as it is and knowing it's not perfect, and The goal is for it to almost be not perfect.
That's great. Love it.
Yeah. That was pretty cool. Then the vessel playing cards. This was probably the most ambitious project I did at the time. It was at the end of 2020. I had like 2 weeks. What was it? No, I had I had 4 weeks left to write my dissertation for the end of the first year of my honors. And then these guys contacted me and they were like, "Hey, we want to do a pack of playing cards for a Christmas thing that we want to send out to clients. So we're going to need it within 2 weeks. We're really sorry for the deadline. It's like it's the entire pack of cards. We've got all the face cards, and the box, the packaging, and I'm like, I've never done one of these before, but it was on my bucket list of of projects. I knew I wanted to do a pack of cards, and when it came up, I accepted it immediately. They could have told me my fee was too high or too low. I wouldn't have cared. I wouldn't have changed it. I would have just been like, I'm gonna do it no matter what. I
Yeah.
would have done it for free almost. I wouldn't have, but I feel like I
Awesome.
would have. This was a really fun project, and we went through so many different kind of iterations. There was a point during one of the nights, there were lots of sleepless nights when I was doing this, where I was walking around my room having like panic attacks, going, I don't know, I'm going to do this. I don't know, I'm going to do this. It's got to be done in 2 weeks. I got to send them sketches tomorrow. I don't have a single card. Da, da, da. And I'm like walking around having a genuine panic attack. And then that was one of the things where I was like, one of those instances where I knew, okay, step out of it somehow, which I eventually did, and just sit down and draw. Just sit down, draw,
Yeah.
see what happens. And I sent them sketches the next day. They were like, oh yeah, we love it. This is cool. This is cool. Let's do this. What about this? Let's tweak this here, tweak that there. And I was like, oh, thank goodness, you know.
Yeah.
And we ended up coming up with a whole. I ended up doing like
Wow.
basically we did two different kings, but there was we decided to interchange the color of the kind of the suits here
That's
so that
so cool.
um, we could double up essentially. So there was king cards, queen cards. The queens were mermaids, and so they were like skeleton mermaids. These little
Very
guys
cool.
here. There were like the masthead of a ship was another queen one. The jack was like a classic sailor guy with his pipe, and then another one was like a ship hand where it's similar, but now is a skeleton with a sig. And then jokers were just fun ones, and then the ace, and then the back of the card. And then
Very
I loved it so much. I ended up doing all these little individual ones as well, just because I'm like, let me just do it. I'm loving it. This is a cool project. And we came up we ended up with this really awesome set. Um,
wow. That's
I've got a
amazing.
box somewhere, and it was just like,
That's amazing. I
yeah.
love it.
This is when I was really like having a physical product of something is so cool. I can literally play with these cards. It's so awesome. I'd love to do more card projects, but yeah, there were a lot of stress with this one, purely from a timeline perspective. But it was so rewarding, and I loved that part of it.
Very
Um, yeah, then there was Masters liquid packaging was where I was getting into more packaging design, and I'm not a big vape guy. I'm not big on the industry or the product, but it was a nice way to kind of illustrate packaging. I thought it was a really cool, like ambitious project. Five different flavors, completely different kind of sub brands, and let's see what happens with them. First
nice.
one was the kind of tied straight into my illustration style. I
Yeah.
loved it with the colors, the texture, everything. I threw in some other colors to see how the application can work. And it was nice to know that I had to work within certain kind of boundaries and see how that would go. We did what was it? This one here, mojito. This was a nice little this was one of the easiest ones that we did because it was quite minimalist and like luxury wise. But it was working out all of these like lines and stuff was an interesting process, and because it's like a puzzle in a way. Then there was this one, really illustrated, kind of old school, etching kind of style. It was This one was really fun to
That's
kind of put
great.
together. I can spot so many things that are wrong with this, but I like to just leave it because it's one of those things. But that was pretty cool. Then there was this one. We loved this one. It was kind of a uh, geometric kind of styling, which was really fun working with. And like I like to kind of inject aspects of the brand. This is what makes custom stuff so I think impactful. You can have those remarkable interactions. It's like the totem poles are kind of
Well,
the e-cigarettes. So it's like you can, by doing something custom, you can literally bring those things in, and create them, which was a really fun experience, as well. And then
I
this one
love
was a
that.
nice
I love
little.
that typography. The tribe typography is really awesome.
Yeah, which I find that interesting because I don't like it. I think it was one of the one. But it was one of those things where it's a style I'm not used to,
Yeah.
but I know it works. So I just have to surrender it and be like, this is just me, but this is what works. And it
Right.
of all the options, it worked the best. So I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a literal perfect example, of that.
Yeah.
Then we did hard candy, which was pretty cool. Nice, like grungy kind of vibe. And what I loved about this was kind of I was free flowing drawing those kind of clouds and stuff all the time. It was a really fun experience.
Nice.
So that was really cool. And
That's
then I'm working on this at the moment. I've been working on a few projects around Drinky Dinky. Is a can company, or it's a beverage company in Australia. They're basically doing what Liquid Death is doing in the
yeah.
States,
Yeah.
but with a slightly different demographic in mind, and like the purpose and goal of that industry of canned water, I think is so great, but it
Yes.
doesn't have as much coverage. You won't find any of that here in SA, and it's almost nowhere to speak of in Oz. So kind of linked up with a guy who was doing that, and we've been working on the branding, logos, the typography, the can packaging,
Very cool.
kind of the box packaging, working with all of this, and it's like it's been so cool
It's
because again,
awesome.
it's one of those physical products that you can actually work with. I don't have any of them yet. I look forward to when I can, but it's so nice to see your work on something instead
Yeah.
of just a post or on Behance or Dribble or Instagram. To have a physical thing. Eventually I have one of these just sitting on my desk
Oh
because
yeah.
I'm just gonna look at it and be like, yep, check that.
That's amazing.
It was a nice little thing, but it's so cool. And I've been working. What's really nice is that through the course of my career, and it's still quite young, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes, by developing a style and kind of figuring out what my process is and the way I do things, and kind of crafting that into something that can be deliverable. I get to work with people who share the same vision, and then we can create really cool products together without me going, I hate this, but I'm going to do it for you because you're paying me for it.
Yeah.
Instead, it's like yeah, we're definitely going to work on this together, and I get to get paid for it. So I get to live by doing this awesome work. And this Drinky Dinky is one of those things where I've been like, it's been so much fun to work on. We've got t-shirts, we're doing all sorts of stuff. We're looking at stickers, packaging, POS stuff. There's all sorts of
Awesome.
things in the works. The only reason I haven't gotten so much more involved is location.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's so much
Yeah.
more I could be doing. But this is one of those awesome projects I'm kind of still working on. But it's
That's
been really fun.
amazing.
Being able to interact with the product, I think, is really cool as a graphic designer.
That's amazing. This is fantastic stuff. I mean, how lucky to be able to work on the stuff that we love, right? And that we feel passionate about. I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
there's a lot of industries that or a lot of people that are able to do that. So I think that's fantastic. Um,
Yeah.
thank you so much for showing us this, Zach. This is
No
amazing.
problem.
Please keep sharing these projects. I mean, I think it's so inspirational.
Yeah, there's so much work that is literally in a hard drive now that I've done that's it's just sitting there because I haven't gotten around to sharing it. The classic designer's issue of I haven't updated my portfolio kind of
Yeah.
situation. I
Well,
need to because this was a great excuse to do that. It's like, oh, I've done these things and I haven't shown
yeah,
anyone. Let me show you guys.
yeah,
So thank you uh thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. It was really cool.
cool. Yeah, absolutely, anytime. Well, thanks, guys. I think let's call it there. This has been great. I don't think we've got time for a Q&A now, but I mean, this will be posted up on socials, and you guys are welcome to tag Zach there and ask away. And he is in the team, so he's around, right?
Yeah, you know where to find me.
Yeah, you know where to find him. But thank you so much, everyone, and thanks for Zach. Thank you so much for putting so much effort into this, and yeah, look forward to what's to come.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Cool, guys. Have a good one. Bye.
Ciao.